"Don't come back," my father whispered in the mist-covered parking lot, his hand still trembling from a tie pulled too tight at the company party. I nodded, but the next morning, I cut them off. Their access, their money, and the family ties that had been strangling me. I thought I would do it alone. I was wrong. My father was holding an ace I never saw coming, and when he played it, the entire game changed in a single heartbeat. My name is Mara Quinn. At 29, I am the head of internal audit for Greyline Dynamics, a title that sounds more powerful than it is. In reality, it makes me a ghost at the feast, the person whose arrival in any department signals a period of uncomfortable scrutiny. I'm the corporate priest who hears confessions no one wants to make. Tonight's feast was the company's 40th anniversary gala, a mandatory spectacle of forced smiles and cheap champagne held in a rented-out convention center in North Ashford. Now, well past midnight, the facade had crumbled, leaving behind the stark reality of the Greyline Dynamics parking lot. The air was cold, sharp with the promise of a late autumn frost. A low-lying mist clung to the asphalt, distorting the pools of sickly orange light cast by the sodium lamps. They made the sleek, expensive cars look rusted and old. Our headquarters, a silent monolith of darkened glass and steel, loomed over the lot like a bored predator. The party was over. The masks were off. I watched my father, Patrick Quinn, fumbling with the keys to his sensible, company-approved sedan. As the head of procurement, he was a man who understood the tangible world, the weight of steel, the cost of copper wire, the logistics of moving pallets from point A to B. He was a creature of spreadsheets and purchase orders, not of schmoozing and corporate politics. Tonight had worn him down. His shoulders were slumped, the crispness gone from his suit, his face a roadmap of exhaustion under the flickering lights. I saw it happen from 20 feet away. A tableau of power dynamics played out in near silence. Serena Vale, our chief financial officer, a woman who moved through the world as if she owned it, cornered him near the executive wing's reserved spaces. She wasn't speaking to him. She was issuing a decree. Her hand, adorned with a diamond that caught the ugly light, shot out and gripped the lapel of his jacket. It wasn't a friendly gesture. It was a yank, a sharp, proprietary tug that pulled him off balance. Thorne Maddox, the CEO, stood beside her, a portrait of casual arrogance in his tailored suit, a thin smile playing on his lips. He watched the exchange with the detached amusement of a king watching a courtier discipline a servant. My father didn't react. He just stood there, taking it. His face, when he turned away from them, was a carefully blank slate. But I had spent a lifetime learning to read the nuances of his silence. I saw the flash of humiliation in his eyes before he could extinguish it. I saw the tightening of his jaw. He saw me watching, and his expression shuddered completely. He walked towards me, his steps heavy. The silence in his car was a physical presence. It was heavier than the cold air outside, thicker than the mist. He started the engine, and the roar of the V6 felt like a violation of the quiet contract of our misery. He didn't look at me. He stared straight ahead, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. The smell of stale champagne and something acrid, fear, filled the small space. He finally turned, his eyes locking onto mine. They were hollowed out, dark with a warning I didn't understand. "Mara," he whispered, his voice rough, urgent. "Don't come back." I frowned. "Don't come back where? To the party? It's over." "No," he shook his head, a sharp, definitive movement. "Don't come back home, and don't come back to the company." The words hung in the air, nonsensical and terrifying. Not come home? The house I grew up in? The one he shared with my stepmother Lorna? Not come back to the company? My job? My career? The entire structure of my adult life? My mouth opened to ask a dozen questions. Why? What happened? What did Serena say to you? But the look on his face stopped me. It was raw, pleading. It wasn't a suggestion. It was an order born of desperation. As he spoke, His hand left the steering wheel to gesture, a motion of dismissal. The sleeve of his shirt rode up an inch. Under the dim glow of the dashboard lights, I saw it. A dark, ugly bruise blooming on the inside of his wrist, shaped vaguely like fingerprints. A surge of cold anger went through me. Who had put that there? Before I could speak, his wallet, which he'd clumsily placed on the center console, slipped. A few cards and a thin piece of paper fluttered to the floor mat. He didn't seem to notice. My eyes, trained to find discrepancies and details others miss, snagged on the slip of paper. It wasn't a gas receipt or a credit card slip. It was a docket from a storage facility. The logo was simple. 2 stylized pine trees. Riverbend Storage. Unit 38B. 24/7. Access. The name was unfamiliar. Why did my father, the head of procurement for a company with 3 massive warehouses of its own, need a private storage unit? Behind us, a car door slammed. A laugh, sharp and metallic, cut through the night. It was Serena. She was standing with Thorne, waiting for the valet to bring his Jaguar around. Her voice carried clearly in the cold, still air. "Don't worry about compliance," she said, a musical lilt of condescension in her tone. "By tomorrow, they'll be silent." Thorne chuckled, a low rumble of approval. "Good. No more loose ends." "They'll be silent. Not they'll sign off, not they'll be satisfied. Silent. My department. She was talking about my department. She was talking about me." The pieces clicked into place with sickening speed. The public humiliation of my father, his desperate, cryptic warning, the bruise on his wrist, the strange storage unit, Serena's threat. It wasn't a random sequence of events. It was a coordinated message. I was the target, and my father was the messenger. A hostage forced to deliver his own daughter's exile notice. He looked at me, his eyes begging for my understanding, for my obedience. I swallowed the 100 questions burning in my throat. I swallowed the rage. I put my hand on the door handle. "Okay," I said, my voice unnaturally calm. I didn't know if I was agreeing to his terms or just ending the conversation. I just knew I had to get out of that car. As I stepped out, another sound caught my attention. The low grumble of a diesel engine. From a side service gate, one typically locked after 6 p.m., a semi-truck was pulling out onto the main road. It was an unmarked 18-wheeler, plain white, its trailer streaked with road grime, no company logo, nothing to identify it, but its presence here, at this hour, leaving from a secured gate on the night of the gala, was an anomaly, and my entire career was built on interrogating anomalies. My training took over. The auditor in my head shoved the terrified daughter aside. Emotion was a liability. Data was a weapon. I didn't hesitate. I turned my back to the truck, raising my phone as if checking a message. My thumb found the camera app. With the screen angled away from my father's car, I snapped 3 quick, silent photos of the truck's rear, capturing the license plate just as it merged into the sparse late-night traffic. The digital click of the shutter was the only sound I made. I didn't look back at my father. I just closed the door and walked away, my heels clicking a sharp, lonely rhythm on the cold asphalt. I didn't go to my car. I walked past the rows of sedans and SUVs, out of the main gate, and into the raw, dark night. The chill seeped into my bones, but my mind was on fire. I walked for miles. I ended up at a 24-hour diner that smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. I sat in a cracked vinyl booth, the warmth of the place feeling alien and unwelcome. I ordered black coffee I didn't drink. On the screen of my phone, I analyzed the pictures. The license plate was from Nevada. Grayline was incorporated in Delaware, with primary operations here in Connecticut. A Nevada plate wasn't damning, but it was another data point that didn't fit the official narrative. I replayed every moment in the parking lot, the way Serena's fingers dug into my father's jacket, the specific wording of his warning, "Don't come back home, and don't come back to the company." It was a 2-pronged expulsion. They weren't just firing me, they were severing me from my family. Using my stepmother Lorna, who also worked at Grayline, in supply chain management, as the anchor to ensure I was cut adrift completely. The bruise, the storage unit, the truck, Serena's promise to Thorne that compliance, my team, me, would be silent by tomorrow. They were moving assets, off the books, using unmarked trucks in the middle of the night. My father, the head of procurement, was involved, willingly or not. He was a cog in their machine. They were cleaning house, and I was the mess they were about to sweep away. They thought a quiet threat delivered by my own father would be enough to make me disappear. They assumed family loyalty and fear would keep me in line. They underestimated me. They saw me as Patrick's quiet, bookish daughter. They forgot that I was the one who designed the systems they were now trying to cheat. I knew every digital backdoor, every flaw in the ERP software, every loophole in the reporting structure because I had helped create them. The sky outside the diner window was beginning to bleed from black to a bruised purple. The first light of dawn, a new day, their deadline, my beginning. I opened the Notes app on my phone. The blinking cursor pulsed in the dim light. My fingers were steady as I typed. It was 5:04 a.m. The note was a promise to myself. It was a strategy. It was an ultimatum of my own. Cut them off before they cut me. The diner's stale air felt like a cage. I'd paid in cash and walked out into the pre-dawn chill. My father's words still ringing in my ears. Don't come back home. The order was a blade, severing the last frayed thread connecting me to the house I grew up in. It wasn't a home anymore, not really. It was just a building where my father lived with Lorna. My mother died when I was 12, a quiet and sudden erasure from our lives. The grief was a fog my father and I navigated alone for 2 years, a silent, clumsy dance. Then Lorna arrived. She came into our house like a consultant hired to optimize a failing business, all brisk efficiency and sharp, assessing glances. She threw out my mother's mismatched floral mugs and replaced them with a sterile, matching white set. She reorganized the pantry, putting everything into clear plastic containers with printed labels. She brought order, and in doing so, scrubbed away the last traces of the woman she was replacing. A year later, she and my father were married, and her title changed from girlfriend to stepmother. Soon after, she took a job at Greyline as a supply chain manager, meshing her life and career so completely with my father's that they became a single, impenetrable unit. I found a sterile, short-term rental apartment online, paid for 3 months sight unseen with my credit card, and drove there in a daze. It was a shoebox in the sky with gray walls and furniture that looked like it had been 3D printed from a catalog of minimalist despair. It was perfect, anonymous, untraceable, for now. As the sun finally rose, casting long skeletal shadows across the unfamiliar room, I opened my laptop. The screen's blue light felt cold on my face. Lorna brought her daughter, Callie, into our lives, a girl my age with none of my quiet introspection and all of her mother's casual cruelty. Callie drifted through life, her only discernible skills being status symbol acquisition and condescension. When I'd chosen my career path, she'd been delighted. It gave her a permanent weapon to use against me. At a family dinner celebrating my promotion to department head, she'd swirled the wine in her glass and smiled sweetly. So you're basically a garbage collector, right? Digging through everyone else's trash, looking for mistakes? How noble. Lorna had laughed, a sound like ice cubes clinking in a glass. Callie, be nice. Mara's work is necessary. The way she said the word made it sound like plumbing or pest control. The garbage collector. The name stuck. To them. My job wasn't about integrity or ensuring the health of the company. It was a dirty, unpleasant task performed by someone who enjoyed wallowing in filth. And now, sitting in this cold, empty apartment, I had to admit they were partially right. I was about to go digging through the filthiest garbage imaginable. The difference was, this time, it was their trash. I bypassed the company's public-facing website and logged into the secure compliance portal using a back-end access key I'd built for myself. A digital skeleton key for emergencies. This was an emergency. The first thing I pulled up was the company's latest annual report, The homepage was a glossy photo of a diverse and smiling group of employees, and there, in a bold, clean font, was our corporate slogan, Gray Line Dynamics, transparency is everything. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. Transparency. The word was a joke. I navigated away from the corporate propaganda and into the vendor payment database. For the last 2 years, I'd noticed a proliferation of new suppliers, all with vaguely impressive but ultimately hollow names. Halcyon Ridge LLC, Ashmore Trade Solutions, Flint and Pine Logistics. They sounded solid, reliable. But when I'd run preliminary checks, I found they were little more than mailing addresses and unanswered phone numbers. They were shell companies, classic, textbook shell companies, used to move money without leaving an obvious trail. I remembered bringing it up with my father 3 months ago. We were in his study, a room that still held the faint scent of my mother's books. He was hunched over his desk, the light from his lamp carving deep lines of stress into his face. "Dad," I'd started, holding a printout of a payment authorization to Halcyon Ridge. "This payment is for consulting services, but the invoice has no itemized list. It's just a flat fee. It's the 3rd one this quarter. It feels off." He didn't look at the paper. He didn't even look at me. He just rubbed his temples. His eyes closed. "It was approved by finance. Mara, it's above my pay grade." "It came from your department's budget," I pressed gently. "I just want to understand the deliverable." His eyes snapped open. For a second, I saw the man from the parking lot, cornered, terrified. The look vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a weary frustration. "Please," he said, his voice low and strained. "Don't stir the pot. Just let it go. For me." I let it go. I told myself he was overworked, that he was tired of fighting battles with the executives upstairs. Now I knew the truth. He wasn't avoiding a fight. He was already a casualty of the war. The war had a general, and her name was Serena Vale. It hadn't always been this way. When I first joined Gray Line, fresh out of my master's program, Serena had taken me under her wing. She was the brilliant, formidable CFO, and she saw something in me. "You don't just see the numbers, Mara," she'd told me over lunch once, her eyes sharp and focused. "You see the story they're trying to tell. That's a rare skill." She'd mentored me, invited me to high-level financial strategy meetings, and championed my promotion to head of audit. I admired her. I wanted to be her. Then, about a year ago, it all stopped. The invitations to meetings dried up. My calls to her office went unreturned. If we passed in the hallway, she'd give me a curt, dismissive nod. I was suddenly on the outside, looking in through soundproof glass. I'd racked my brain trying to figure out what I'd done, what invisible line I had crossed. Now I understood. It wasn't something I did. It was something I might do. My rare skill, seeing the story in the numbers, had transformed from an asset into a threat. She didn't push me out. She preemptively locked the door before I could find the skeletons she was hiding in the closet. My fingers flew across the keyboard, fueled by caffeine and a cold, clarifying rage. I had the Nevada license plate from the truck, a quick, gray market search in a logistics database, a tool I wasn't technically supposed to have access to, linked the plate to a small, independent hauler that contracted with dozens of companies. But they had a digital manifest system. I sliced through their firewall. It was pathetically weak. I searched for last night's pickups in North Ashford. There it was. One pickup, from a Gray Line service depot. The cargo was listed as scrap metal and obsolete equipment for disposal. The manifest had a unique alphanumeric code. I copied the code. Then, I toggled back to Gray Line's internal procurement system. The system was my home turf. I knew its every weakness. I ran a search query, looking for any purchase order that contained the manifest code in its reference field. My breath caught. A hit. Not one, but a series of 12 identical POs, all generated within the last 48 hours. They were for expedited maintenance and repair supplies. The vendor was a company I'd never heard of. Riverbend Services. The delivery address wasn't a Gray Line facility. It was an industrial park on the outskirts of town. the same industrial park where Riverbend Storage was located. The total value of the 12 purchase orders was just over $2 million. My father's digital signature was on every single one. The system logged them as delivered and received. They were using purchase orders for phantom supplies to justify wiring $2 million to a shell company, then loading a truck with actual assets, valuable scrap metal, maybe even refurbished equipment, and moving it to an off-site, untraceable location. It was a classic fraud scheme. Misappropriation of assets layered on top of a fraudulent disbursement. It was elegant, bold, and incredibly reckless. The memory of another family dinner, just last week, surfaced with jarring clarity. The four of us sat around the polished dining table Lorna had bought. The silence was punctuated only by the clinking of cutlery on porcelain. I'd mentioned a difficult audit I was conducting on a different department, how I'd uncovered irregularities that could get a manager fired. Lorna had placed her fork down and given me a thin, pitying smile. "Mara, darling," she'd said, her voice dripping with false concern. "A word of advice. Don't try to be a hero. Heroes are just people who don't know when to look the other way. They usually end up with nothing." Callie had snickered into her napkin. My father had just stared intently at his mashed potatoes, as if they held the secrets to the universe. It wasn't advice. It was a warning. The same warning he'd given me in the car, just packaged in a socially acceptable, passive-aggressive shell. Look the other way. I pushed my chair back from the small desk, the legs scraping against the cheap laminate floor. I walked to the window and looked down at the city, now fully awake and moving. Cars flowed like blood cells through concrete arteries. Everyone down there was living a normal life, governed by normal rules. Up here, in this sterile box, I had slipped into a parallel reality where my family wasn't my family and the company I dedicated my life to was a criminal enterprise. I thought about that dinner table, the perfect white plates, the gleaming silverware. I remembered picking up a piece of bread, feeling the weight of their collective gaze on me. Lorna, Callie, my father, they were all part of the same silent agreement. They all knew the fundamental rule of the house we lived in and the company we worked for. I was the only one who didn't. As I stood there, watching the traffic flow, the realization settled over me, as cold and hard as the glass against my forehead, at Greyline, and in my own family. I was the only person who was not allowed to ask why. My entire job, my entire identity, was built on that single question, and that's what made me the loose end they had to silence. The city outside my window hummed with the banal errands of a Saturday morning. People were buying groceries, walking their dogs, living lives governed by predictable patterns. My world had shrunk to the 15-inch display of my laptop. The patterns I was seeing were anything but predictable. They were seismic. I ran a top-level variance analysis on quarterly departmental spending. The numbers materialized on the screen, a neat column of black and red. My eyes went straight to the line item, maintenance services. The figure was astronomical. A quarterly spend that was normally in the low six figures had ballooned. I isolated the data. I ran the calculation. The variance against the previous quarter was an increase of 312%. The number didn't feel real. It was a statistical impossibility, a glitch in the matrix. An increase of that magnitude should have been preceded by a catastrophic failure, a fire, a flood, a fleet of vehicles simultaneously breaking down. It would have triggered alarms all the way up to the board. Yet there were no such alarms. I drilled down. The 312% was composed of payments to a handful of new vendors. Riverbend Services was the largest. I cross-referenced the payment authorizations with the work order database. Nothing. No logged service calls. No technician reports. No receipts for parts. It was a ghost expense. Millions of dollars paid into a void for services that were never rendered. The data didn't whisper. It screamed. My mind went back to the slip of paper that fell from my father's wallet. Riverbend Storage. The name on the fraudulent purchase orders was Riverbend Services. It was a clumsy, arrogant link. They were either confident no one would ever look, or they were in such a hurry they didn't care. I pulled up the photos of the truck from last night. The Nevada plate resolved into sharp focus. The manifest I'd pulled from the hauler's server had listed the truck's GPS-logged final destination for the night. I mapped the coordinates. They pointed to an industrial park in the suburbs, to a specific address, the address of Riverbend Storage. The connection was made. The digital ghost now had a physical location. I turned my attention to the invoices themselves. They were perfect digital forgeries. The gray line logo was in the correct place. The formatting matched our corporate template, but something was off. A subtle, almost imperceptible detail that my brain, conditioned by years of staring at these documents, snagged on. The font, all official gray line documentation, from internal memos to multi-million-dollar invoices, used Century Gothic. It was a rigid, unbreakable rule, one of the first things drilled into any new employee. These invoices used Calibri. It was a small thing, a stupid thing, but it was everything. It was the tell. It meant the person who created these documents wasn't a seasoned gray line veteran. It wasn't someone from finance or procurement who lived by the corporate style guide. It was an outsider, or an insider who was careless, an amateur, someone who didn't know that I, Mara Quinn, had personally written the macro that rejected any invoice submitted in the wrong font. They must have submitted these through a back channel, bypassing my automated checks. Someone who thought fonts didn't matter. Someone like Callie. As if summoned by the thought, my laptop chimed. A new email. The sender was Serena Vale. My blood ran cold. The subject line was curt. Q3 audit. I opened it. The message was 3 sentences. Mara, I expect the preliminary findings from your Q3 departmental audit on my desk at 9 a.m. Monday. Please ensure all supporting documentation is attached. No delays. It was Saturday morning. She was giving me less than 48 hours. This wasn't a standard request. It was a demand, a trap. She wasn't asking for an audit. She was asking for my ammunition. She wanted to see my hand before I could play it. The deadline wasn't for me to finish my work. It was for them to finish their cleanup. The font, Callie, the deadline, Serena, the pieces were connecting, forming a tight, suffocating net. I needed to see who had the power to override my invoice macros. I needed to see the system logs. I delved deeper into the system's back end, into the raw access logs of the ERP software. It was a river of code, a torrent of timestamps and user IDs. I filtered the data, searching for permission escalations within the last 24 hours. My screen filled with routine, automated processes, and then I saw it. User ID, C. Quinn, time, 02:13 a.m., request, temporary administrative privileges, granted. Callie, at 2 in the morning, right after the gala. Her basic, low-level account, an account that should only have been able to view supply chain data, had been granted the keys to the kingdom. She had the power to alter records, to delete logs, to move digital mountains. The authorization was signed off by a senior IT director I knew, was firmly in Serena's pocket. They weren't just using my stepsister for her carelessness with fonts. She was their digital cleaner, sent in after hours to wipe the system of their fingerprints. I felt a desperate need for visual proof, for something tangible beyond the cold logic of the data. The service depot where the truck was loaded, it had cameras. I found the depot's IP address on the network and forced a remote connection. I navigated the clumsy interface of the security software and pulled up the archives from last night. The timestamp read 01:47 a.m. The footage was grainy, washed out by the same sodium lamps that had illuminated the parking lot. There was the unmarked truck, its trailer doors open. There were 2 figures, bundled in dark work coats, hauling crates from the depot into the trailer. One of them turned. Even in the low resolution, I knew it was my father. He looked smaller, diminished. He lifted a heavy wooden box, his movements stiff and weary. He looked like a man condemned. Then, he did something extraordinary. He stopped. He turned his head slightly, and for 3 full seconds, he looked directly into the security camera. There was no mistaking it. It was not a casual glance. His eyes, even his pixels, were fixed, intentional. It was a look of grim resignation, but also of purpose. It was a message. He knew he was being recorded. He knew they were watching him, and he must have known that, eventually, I would be watching too. He was a prisoner, yes, but he was leaving me a trail of breadcrumbs through the digital forest. He was showing me he was there. He was confirming his part in it, leaving an indelible piece of evidence that could not be denied. The 48-hour clock was ticking loudly in my head. I had to assume that by Monday morning, Callie, the digital janitor, would have erased all of this, the logs, the POs, maybe even this security footage. I had to save it. I had to build my own ark. I initiated a targeted data transfer to a series of encrypted external hard drives. I didn't just take a few files. I took everything, every contract, master service agreement, and statement of work ever executed with Halcyon Ridge LLC, Ashmore Trade Solutions, and Flint and Pine Logistics. I pulled every single invoice, every payment record, every piece of internal correspondence that mentioned their names. The progress bar on my screen moved slowly, a thin green line representing my only hope. It felt like I was downloading the soul of the conspiracy. I worked for hours, the sun arcing across the sky outside my window, unnoticed. When the final download completed, I leaned back, my body aching from the tension. I opened a new, secure document. It was time to stop reacting and start defining. It was time to write the story the numbers were telling me. My fingers typed, the words coming out in the cold, precise language of a final audit report. Conclusion: preliminary investigation. Finding 1, fraudulent disbursement, systematic payment for non-existent maintenance services to shell corporations. Evidence suggests price gouging and kickbacks to Gray Line executives. Finding 2, misappropriation of assets, undocumented removal of physical company property, scrap equipment, via an unsanctioned logistics channel. Finding 3, money laundering. Evidence suggests a potential scheme to commingle funds from fraudulent payments with revenue from the sale of misappropriated assets, channeled through the Riverbend storage facility. The words stared back at me from the screen. It wasn't a theory anymore. It was a conclusion. Stark, simple, devastating. I had found the crack in the ledger. Now, I had less than 2 days to break it wide open before they sealed it forever, burying me inside. Sunday, 07:12 a.m., the world was sleeping in, going to church, reading the paper. I was at war. My battlefield was a scarred IKEA desk in a soulless apartment, my weapon a laptop hot enough to burn my legs. Serena's deadline wasn't a threat, it was a starting pistol. I couldn't fight them on their terms, through their systems. I needed a way in that they didn't control, a door they had forgotten they'd left unlocked, and I found it. Buried deep in the network architecture was an auxiliary administrative console, a relic from a system migration 5 years ago. It was supposed to have been decommissioned, but it never was. Serena herself had commissioned it, a vanity project to give her a clean, top-level dashboard view of the company's finances. Her IT sycophants had built it for her, and in their haste, they had misconfigured the root permissions. It was a ghost door, a flaw in the system left behind by the architect of my destruction, a beautiful, fatal piece of irony. My fingers found the command line. The system blinked. Waiting. I had root. First, the janitor. I pulled up the user permissions list. The name mocked me from the screen. C. Quinn. Status: Administrator. The rage was a cold, clean fire. I didn't hesitate. My fingers flew across the keyboard, typing commands that felt like spells. Execute. User. Permission. Revoke. C. Quinn. The system asked for confirmation. I hit enter. The green administrator tag next to her name flickered and died. Replaced by the gray, powerless, standard user, she was locked out, blinded, to cover my tracks. I opened the IT system log and created a new entry. My fingers typed the bland, bureaucratic language that would render my action invisible. Routine security audit complete. Dormant temporary privileges for user C. Quinn de-escalated per security protocol Q42. Ticket 7784. Status: closed. I was a ghost. Cleaning up after their cleaner. Next, the money. Revoking Callie's access was defensive. I needed to go on the offensive. I opened a code editor. The black screen a canvas for my counterattack. I wrote a simple, brutal script. It was barely 20 lines of code. But it was a digital guillotine. It was a logic bomb set to trigger on any payment request processed through the ERP. The logic was simple. If vendor name equals Riverbend Services, or Halcyon Ridge LLC, or Ashmore Trade, or Flint and Pine, then set payment status equals hold admin review. I embedded the script directly into the payment processing module, camouflaged as a routine update. The moment they tried to pay one of their shell companies, the system would freeze the transaction. All $2 million of those phantom POs were now locked in digital cement. But freezing it wasn't enough. I added another function to the script. This one targeted our corporate bank. The script would automatically generate a high-priority alert to the bank's fraud and risk management department. I typed the automated message myself, using the dry, impersonal language of the banking system. System alert. Potential structuring activity detected. Multiple high-value payments flagged to newly onboarded vendors with thin documentation. Account action required per federal compliance guidelines. Ref. Grayline Dynamics. ACT 77201A. I wasn't just stopping the payment, I was anonymously reporting my own company to its primary financial partner, using their own automated systems to do it. I was turning their own financial infrastructure into a weapon against them. I hit execute. The script deployed silently. A virus waiting for a trigger. Now for the physical front. Riverbend Storage. They had a physical location, a hoard of stolen assets. They felt safe there. I intended to violate that safety. During my deep dive, I had found the digital records for the corporate access cards. My father's department had been issued a new set of RFID cards for off-site logistics management 6 months ago. I found the card number assigned for access to the Riverbend facility. I logged into the building management software, another ancient, neglected system. I found the master list of active keycards. I scrolled until I found the number. Then I clicked the button next to it. Report card as lost, stolen. A dialog box appeared. Are you sure you want to permanently deactivate this card? I clicked yes. Somewhere in their system, a switch flipped. The gate at Riverbend Storage would no longer open for them. The next time their truck rolled up, the reader would blink red. Access denied. I had locked the dragon out of its own cave. The digital tripwires were set. Now, it was time to light the match. I had spent the night refining my preliminary findings into a concise, 3-page report. It was a masterpiece of damning evidence, presented in the cold, emotionless language of an audit. I attached it to a new email. The recipient line was a declaration of war. I typed in the names of every single member of the Grayline Dynamics Board of Directors. One by one, I added the entire legal department to the CC line. For the subject, I used the language of pure corporate terror. Urgent. Preliminary audit findings. Q3 financial variance, 300%. I wrote the body of the email. It was short and formal. Board members, please find attached a preliminary draft report from internal audit regarding a critical financial variance detected this weekend. The variance points to a material risk that requires your immediate attention. Due to the sensitive nature of the findings, the document is password protected. I am formally requesting an emergency meeting to discuss this matter at the earliest possible opportunity. Regards, Mara Quinn, Head of Internal Audit. I hit send. The email shot out into the world, a digital flare that could not be unseen. It was time-stamped. It was documented. They could no longer fire me and bury this. I had made it the board's problem now. They were legally obligated to act. But I wasn't going to wait for them to decide when to meet. I was going to force the confrontation. Using my departmental credentials, I accessed the board's shared calendar. Their Sunday was a sea of white space. I created a new event, I invited every recipient of the email. I set the time for 3 p.m. that afternoon. For the title, I used the same subject line from the email, adding a suffix. Immediate material risk assessment required. A Sunday afternoon meeting with a title like that wasn't a request. It was a summons. They would be there. I leaned back, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had done it. In the space of an hour, I had locked them out of their systems, frozen their money, secured their physical location, and alerted the highest levels of the company. My phone buzzed on the desk, a text message from a blocked number. My hands trembled as I picked it up. The message was 6 words. You just signed your death warrant. The fear was a spike of ice in my gut. It was real. They were watching. They were reacting. The threat wasn't hyperbole, it was a promise, but the fear was quickly consumed by a wave of cold clarity. The threat meant my attacks had landed. They were panicking. They were exposed. It was time to disappear. Time to make the final cut. I stood up and began to move with a single-minded purpose. I powered down the laptop. I ejected the 3 encrypted hard drives that contained the entire case against them. They were my only copies, my only leverage. I slipped them into a padded sleeve and placed them at the bottom of my backpack. I took the burner phone I had bought for cash and placed it on the desk. Then I took my personal phone, opened the back, and pulled out the SIM card. I placed it on the desk and snapped the small piece of plastic in half with my thumbnail. The 2 pieces lay there like a broken tooth. I looked around the anonymous apartment. It had served its purpose. It was a shell, and I was done with it. I walked to the small kitchen counter and placed the keycard next to the sink. I straightened the chair at the desk. I left nothing of myself behind. With the backpack slung over my shoulder, I walked out the door and didn't look back. I was cutting them all off. Serena, Thorne, Lorna, Callie, even my father. I was severing every digital and physical tie. I was a ghost in the machine, and now I was a ghost in the world. The weight of the hard drives in my bag was immense. It was the weight of the truth, and it was the only thing I had left. At precisely 3 p.m., I walked into Glass Conference Room 4. The name was literal. 3 of the 4 walls were floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a panoramic, godlike view of the city below. The 4th wall was a seamless sheet of white smart glass, currently opaque. The air was chilled to an expensive, unnatural degree. It smelled of nothing, the scent of absolute power. They were already waiting for me, arranged around the massive black marble table like figures in a diorama of corporate execution. Serena Vale sat at the head, a picture of serene, predatory calm. Her smile was a thin, red slash. Opposite her, CEO Thorne Maddox leaned back in his chair, radiating an aura of bored impatience. Between them sat a man I didn't know, but whose suit cost more than my car. He had the bland, watchful face of a very expensive lawyer. His nameplate read, Marcus Dwyer, Dwyer and Moss, the company's external counsel. The sharks had been summoned. The silence was a weapon. They let it hang in the air as I took a seat at the far end of the table. Placing my backpack on the empty chair beside me, they wanted me to feel small, isolated, a lone defendant facing a panel of judges who had already reached their verdict. Serena broke the silence first, her voice smooth as polished stone. Mara, thank you for coming on a Sunday. We appreciate your diligence. She folded her hands on the table, the diamond on her finger catching the light. Then, the smile widened, showing a hint of teeth. We've reviewed your little project. It's quite creative. Tell me, have you considered a career in fiction? I said nothing. I just met her gaze. Let me be direct, she continued, her tone shifting from condescending to clinical. Are you attempting to use falsified data and fabricated conclusions to extort this company? There it was, the trap, sprung with textbook precision, the disgruntled employee narrative. It was the oldest play in the book. Paint the whistleblower as unstable, a liar, a blackmailer, discredit the messenger, and the message dies. Thorne leaned forward, his casual boredom replaced by a look of manufactured gravity. He slid a thick manila envelope across the polished surface of the table. It stopped a few feet from my hand. "This doesn't have to be unpleasant, Mara," he said, his voice a low, reasonable purr. "We know you've been under a lot of pressure. We're prepared to be generous. That's a severance agreement, 6 months' salary, full benefits, and a glowing letter of recommendation. All you have to do is sign the NDA, hand over your research, and walk away." It was a package deal, a bribe wrapped in a threat, tied with a bow of feigned concern. I ignored the envelope. I ignored them. I reached into my backpack, pulled out a small, encrypted thumb drive, a decoy, holding only the specific files for this presentation, and plugged it into the table's central console. I tapped the control panel. The smart glass wall flickered to life, becoming a high-definition screen. "I am not here to discuss my employment status," I said, my voice clear and steady in the silent room. "I am here to report a material risk to this company, as is my duty as head of internal audit." On the screen, a satellite map of North Ashford appeared. A red line began to trace a path from the Gray Line service depot to the industrial park in the suburbs. "This is the GPS-logged route of an unmarked transport vehicle that left company property at 1:47 a.m. Saturday morning." I clicked a button. The screen split. On one side was the map. On the other, the 12 fraudulent purchase orders appeared, their $2 million total glowing at the bottom of the page. The departure of the truck coincided with the finalization of 12 purchase orders for expedited maintenance and repair supplies from a vendor named Riverbend Services. Another click. A high-resolution photo of the truck's rear filled the screen. The Nevada license plate was clear as day. "The vehicle's plate is registered to a third-party hauler. The hauler's manifest, which I have here, lists the cargo as scrap metal and obsolete equipment. It does not list $2 million in maintenance supplies." I looked up from my laptop. Meeting their eyes, the smiles were gone. The purchase orders were signed by my father, Patrick Quinn. The payment was routed to a shell company. The truck delivered physical assets to an off-site storage facility, also owned by that shell company. This is a coordinated scheme to defraud the company of both cash and physical assets. I let the words hang in the air. For a moment, there was only the faint hum of the room's ventilation system. Serena recovered first. She laughed, a short, sharp bark devoid of humor. "Impressive. You really have been busy, but you seem to have missed one crucial detail in your little investigation." She looked at Dwyer, who gave a slight, confident nod. "Our IT department was also busy this morning. Mara," Serena said, her voice turning hard as steel. "They were investigating an unauthorized system breach that occurred at 7:12 a.m. The breach originated from an old, decommissioned admin console. The logs show that you illegally escalated your own permissions, tampered with user accounts, and accessed financial records far outside the scope of your authorized audit." She leaned forward, her eyes glittering with triumph. "The data you're presenting is fruit of the poisonous tree. It's inadmissible. What you've done isn't an audit. It's corporate espionage." Thorne chimed in, the reasonable mask gone, revealing the predator beneath. "It's a felony. Mara, you could go to prison." The lawyer, Dwyer, finally spoke, his voice dry as dust. "Your client has exposed herself to significant legal jeopardy, both civil and criminal. I advise you to accept the generous severance offer and cease this illegal activity immediately." They had me. They knew I'd had to break the rules to get the proof. They were going to use my methods to invalidate my findings. They would paint me as a criminal, a hacker who fabricated a story to cover her tracks. The weight of their power, of the entire legal and corporate structure they commanded, pressed down on me, threatening to crush me. And then, the door opened. It opened without a sound, a silent, dramatic reveal. My father stood in the doorway. He looked a decade older than he had 2 nights ago in the parking lot. His shirt was wrinkled. His face was pale and drawn, but his eyes were clear. They were fixed on me. In his right hand, he held a small, black object. It was an old microcassette recorder, a relic from another century. Thorne swore under his breath. Serena's face went rigid, a mask of fury. "Patrick, what the hell are you doing here? Get out!" My father ignored them. He walked slowly into the room and stopped beside me. He placed the recorder on the black marble table. The plastic device looked absurdly out of place in the sleek, sterile environment. He looked at Serena, then at Thorne. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet, but it filled the room. The boxes I loaded onto that truck were empty. I was instructed to carry them, to make sure I was seen by the camera. A little bit of theater, you said, Serena, to make the manifest look legitimate. He paused, taking a breath. But I've been doing a little theater of my own. I've been recording my conversations with you for the past 3 months. Serena let out a sharp, derisive laugh. "You idiot! You absolute fool!" She looked at Dwyer, a triumphant smirk on her face. "That's an illegal recording. It's worthless. In fact, you've just confessed to another felony." Dwyer nodded, looking at my father with contempt. "Wiretapping is a serious crime. Mr. Quinn?" My father didn't flinch. He just looked at them. And then I spoke, my voice cutting through their confidence. "No, it's not." All eyes turned to me. "Connecticut General Statutes, Section 52570D, I said, the legal code I had spent all of last night memorizing, feeling like a shield in my mouth. "It's a one-party consent state." The lawyer, Dwyer, frowned. His brow furrowed for a fraction of a second as he mentally checked the statute. His eyes widened almost imperceptibly. He knew I was right. I looked directly at Serena. As long as one person in the conversation is aware it's being recorded, in this case, my father, the recording is perfectly legal, and it is perfectly admissible as evidence. The temperature in Glass Conference Room 4 dropped 10 degrees. The smug confidence evaporated from Serena's face, replaced by a flicker of pure, animal panic. Thorne's face, which had been a mask of arrogant dismissal, was suddenly ashen. The lawyer stared at the cheap plastic recorder on the table as if it were a bomb. The power in the room had just shifted. It had tilted, violently and irrevocably. It was no longer them against me. It was their own words, captured on a tiny magnetic tape, waiting to condemn them. The game had changed, and my father, the silent, broken man from the parking lot, had just dealt the winning hand. My father's hand, the one that had been trembling in the parking lot, was perfectly steady now. He reached out a single, calloused finger and pressed the small, rectangular play button. There was a faint click, followed by the soft, mechanical whir of the spindles turning. A low hiss filled the silent room. For a moment, that was the only sound. Then, a voice emerged from the tiny speaker, tinny and distorted, but unmistakably clear. It was Serena. "Just adjust the weight logs for the scrap tonnage. Lorna, the manifest needs to show a 30% reduction. Call it water weight loss or material degradation. Nobody checks that garbage." A faint rustle of paper. Then, my stepmother's voice, thin and eager to please. "Of course, Serena, and the payment from Halcyon Ridge for Patrick's last sign-off?" Serena's voice was slick with condescension. "Already in motion. Thorne is handling the house's cut personally. You just make sure those logs are clean before Mara's little bloodhounds come sniffing around." In the conference room, Serena went pale. A dull, chalky white spread from her neck up to her hairline. Her lips, once a sharp red line of authority, were now a bloodless slit in a mask of disbelief. Thorne, who had been leaning back with such casual arrogance, was now sitting bolt upright, his hands flat on the table as if to keep himself from falling. My father pressed fast forward. The recorder emitted a high-pitched chipmunk squeal. He pressed stop, then play again. A new scene. This time, Serena's voice was syrupy, the sound of a spider coaxing a fly. "Now, the password gives you admin rights for exactly 1 hour. That's more than enough time." A younger, more petulant voice answered, "Callie, I know, but it's so boring. Why do I have to do it?" "Because," Serena's voice dropped, losing its sweetness and gaining a hard, menacing edge. You enjoy the credit card I pay for. You enjoy the apartment I co-signed on. This is your chore. You go in. You find the access logs for the service depot and the procurement authorizations from the last 72 hours, and you delete them. Wipe the logs clean. Sweetie, make it look like it never happened. The recording clicked off. The silence that rushed back in was heavier than before, thick with guilt and conspiracy. Callie, my vapid, useless stepsister, was their cleaner, and my stepmother, Lorna, was an active participant, falsifying documents at Serena's command. My father reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out the crumpled receipt from the storage facility, the one I had seen fall in his car. He smoothed it out on the polished marble table. Taped to the back was a small, unassuming brass key. "This wasn't for a unit I rented," he said, his voice low and steady. He looked at Thorne. "It was the one you rented, under the name Flint and Pine Logistics. You gave me this key as a fail-safe, in case the electronic gate went down." He pushed the receipt and the key across the table. "It's the key to Unit 38B, the rental agreement and the physical key, a perfect chain of custody. I believe the auditors call it." The lawyer, Dwyer, stared at the key as if it were a scorpion. He knew exactly what it was. It was the physical link that connected their digital crimes to a real-world location, a link that would be undeniable to any investigator. The room seemed to fade into the background. All I could see was my father. He turned his gaze from the broken executives and looked at me. For the first time, there was no fear in his eyes, only a deep, bottomless well of regret. "I said don't come back to keep you out of this. Mara," he said, his voice barely a whisper, meant only for me. "They were going to use me to set you up, to frame you. They told me if I didn't play along, they would destroy us both. I was trying to push you away from the fire. I'm so sorry I couldn't tell you sooner." The intricate web of corporate fraud, the millions of dollars, the lies, it all vanished. In its place was a simple, heartbreaking truth. It wasn't a betrayal. It was a shield. The only way he knew how to protect me was to make me hate him. My own voice felt foreign in my throat. "Are you safe?" It was the only question that mattered. He nodded slowly, a profound sadness in his eyes. "I am now," he said. "If you see this through." He was giving me the weapon, but he was asking me to fire the final shot. His safety was now tied to my resolve. The corporate machine sputtered back to life. Dwyer, the lawyer, cleared his throat, his composure reasserting itself. "In light of this new information, I suggest we take a 30-minute recess to discuss our options." He was trying to stop the bleeding, to get his clients out of the room, to regroup and build a new wall of lies. "No," Serena's voice was sharp, brittle. She was cornered, a predator lashing out. Her panic was making her reckless. "We will not recess. The issue on the table is this employee's illegal breach of our systems. I call for a vote on her immediate termination." It was a stunningly foolish move. She was trying to drag the conversation back to the script, but the script had already been set on fire. I didn't even look at her. I calmly reached into my backpack and pulled out one of the encrypted hard drives. It was heavy, solid in my hand. I plugged it into my laptop. "The recordings provide context, but the data tells the whole story," I said to the room at large. On the screen behind me, the jumble of spreadsheets and documents vanished, replaced by a single, clean flowchart. It was simple, elegant, and utterly damning. A box labeled Gray Line Dynamics Operating Account sat at the top. From it, a thick red arrow pointed to a series of smaller boxes. Halcyon Ridge, Ashmore Trade, Flint and Pine. From those boxes, other arrows converged on a single box labeled Riverbend Aggregator Account. And from that box, one final, bold arrow pointed to the bottom of the screen, to a box that read Sancti Christopher Financial, Cayman Islands, account 818-4409. I had found their offshore account. I had followed the money to the end of the line. Thorne Maddox, who had been silent, staring at the screen with a look of horror, finally broke. A single, sharp curse cut through the air. Shit. At that exact moment, as if choreographed by some god of vengeance, a new email notification popped onto the corner of my laptop screen, which was still projected for the whole room to see. It was from the compliance department of our corporate bank. The subject line read, Urgent System Alert. Account Freeze Confirmation. ACT 7721A. I clicked it open. The message was brief. The corporate language a death sentence. Pursuant to our internal review of the automated system flag, a temporary administrative freeze has been placed on all outgoing wire transfers from the specified account, pending a full investigation into potential fraudulent activity. A senior risk officer will be in contact shortly. Checkmate. My script had worked. The alert I had planted hours ago had triggered the bank's protocols. I had not only found their slush fund, I had, from my anonymous apartment that morning, frozen their primary operating account. The money had stopped. The escape route was closed. The game was over. The email from the bank hung on the giant screen, a digital epitaph written in cold corporate language. For a full 10 seconds, the only sound in the room was the hum of the climate control system. Then, the noise began. It started with a low, insistent buzz. Serena's phone, lying face down on the marble table, began to vibrate, skittering across the polished surface like a dying insect. She slapped her hand down on it. Before the silence could resettle, another phone buzzed from down the table, then another. It was a cascade, a digital plague spreading through the room. I could see the blood drain from the faces of the other board members as they glanced at their screens. They were all getting the alerts, their own CFOs, their division heads, all reporting the same impossible news. Greyline's financial artery, its primary operating account, had been clamped shut. Thorne fumbled for his own phone, his movements clumsy, his face a mask of disbelief. What is this? This is a mistake. It is not a mistake. The voice came from the oldest member of the board, a man named Arthur Vance, whose family had held a seat since the company's founding. His face was grim, his voice like granite. He ignored Thorne and Serena, his gaze sweeping over the other panicked board members. We have a catastrophic failure of executive oversight. We need a motion. A younger board member, a woman from the tech sector, spoke immediately. I move that the board retain an independent forensic accounting firm to conduct a full, unrestricted investigation into the matters raised by Ms. Quinn. Seconded, another voice snapped. All in favor, Vance commanded, not asked. Hands went up all around the table. It was nearly unanimous. A coup executed in less than 30 seconds. Vance then fixed his cold gray eyes on Serena. Serena Vale, pursuant to the company's bylaws regarding financial malfeasance, you are hereby suspended from all duties as Chief Financial Officer, effective immediately. Corporate security will escort you from the building. Please surrender your ID and all company property. Before Serena could even react, the conference room door flew open, slamming against the wall with a loud crack. Lorna stood there, her face contorted in a mask of fury, her carefully constructed corporate composure shattered. She wasn't a supply chain manager anymore. She was a cornered animal. Her eyes, wild and accusatory, found my father. "Patrick!" she shrieked, her voice echoing in the stunned silence. "How could you? You betrayed your family." My father, who had been standing silently beside me, didn't raise his voice. He didn't even look angry. He just looked tired, a profound, bone-deep weariness in his eyes. He looked at the woman he had been married to for more than a decade and asked a simple, devastating question. "What family, Lorna?" Trailing behind her, weeping, was Callie. Her face was puffy, her makeup running in dark streaks down her cheeks. She looked from her mother's enraged face to Serena's frozen one. "Mom," she wailed, her voice the frightened cry of a child. "Are we going to be okay?" Serena turned on her. Her face was a frozen, contemptuous mask. All the warmth and manipulative sweetness she displayed on the tape was gone, replaced by pure reptilian coldness. "Shut up," she hissed. The words were so brutal, so devoid of any human empathy, that Callie actually flinched back. I glanced up, my eyes drawn to the small, black dome of the security camera mounted on the ceiling. Its tiny red light was glowing steadily. It was recording everything, every shout, every lie, every betrayal. Thorne, ever the politician, saw his empire crumbling and made one last desperate attempt at damage control. He ignored Serena and Lorna, walking around the table to stand before Arthur Vance and me. He spread his hands in a gesture of placation. "Arthur, Mara, let's be rational. We can handle this. A quiet, internal solution. We can protect the company, protect our shareholders. There's no need to let this spiral." A quiet solution, a severance package for Serena, a restructuring, a press release about executive realignment, bury the crime, protect the brand. I had seen it happen a dozen times. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it cut through his pleading. I looked past him, at the faces of the board members. A quiet solution doesn't help the half-dozen small contractors Greyline squeezed into bankruptcy over the last year to cover the budget shortfalls from this scheme. It doesn't help the employees who were laid off in your efficiency drive while you were wiring millions to the Cayman Islands. I stood up, feeling a strength I didn't know I possessed. The victims aren't in this room, and they don't get a quiet solution. The lawyer, Dwyer, who had been silent since his monumental blunder about the one-party consent law, suddenly straightened up. His allegiance had shifted. He was no longer Serena and Thorne's lawyer. He was Greyline's lawyer, and his only job now was to cauterize the wound. He picked up a leather-bound folio and began to read in a formal monotone. Pursuant to Section 7 of the Greyline Dynamics Corporate Governance and Ethics Policy, the board hereby formally recognizes a whistleblower complaint. The company extends the full and complete protections of this policy, including full indemnification against any retaliatory action, to the complainants. He paused, looking up from the page. The complainants are hereby formally identified as Ms. Mara Quinn and Mr. Patrick Quinn. It was a shield, thrown up around us at the last possible second. My father was no longer a co-conspirator. He was a protected whistleblower. While Dwyer was reading, I had turned back to my laptop. They were busy building their internal life raft, preparing for the storm. They had no idea I was about to summon a hurricane. I opened my web browser. I navigated to the public reporting portal of the State Attorney General's office. I filled in the required fields. Then, I found the attachment button. I uploaded the entire, unredacted file, my full report, the raw data, the security footage of my father, and a digitized copy of the audio from his microcassette recorder. I listed my father and myself as the primary witnesses. I clicked Submit. A small green checkmark appeared. Your submission has been received. I looked up at the room. "For the record," I announced, my voice ringing with finality, "a complete copy of my findings, including the audio recordings, has just been transmitted to the State Attorney General." The rhythm of the room, the frantic chaos, broke. It shattered into a million pieces, replaced by a profound, echoing silence. The problem was no longer contained within these glass walls. I had thrown it out into the world, directly into the hands of the one authority they could not control, bribe, or intimidate. The main door to the conference room opened again. This time, it wasn't an angry wife or a crying stepdaughter. It was the head of corporate security, and he looked deeply uncomfortable. He was flanked by two people in dark, severe suits that were not from Greyline. A woman with sharp eyes and an iron-gray bob stepped forward. She held up a badge. "Andrea Bishop, Senior Vice President of Forensic Risk, United National Bank. We're here in response to a federal anti-money laundering alert triggered on your primary accounts." Her eyes scanned the room, landing on Arthur Vance. "By the authority granted in our commercial financing agreements, we are here to secure all original financial records for the last 24 months. We will require your full cooperation." The chaos was over. The collapse was complete. The outside world had arrived. The days that followed were a blur of calculated, deliberate actions. The chaos in the glass conference room had been the demolition. This was the cleanup, my cleanup. On Monday morning, while Greyline Dynamics was in full crisis mode, its executives locked in meetings with lawyers and bankers, I sat at the small desk in my sterile apartment and typed 2 documents. The first was my letter of resignation, effective immediately. I stated that given the ongoing investigation which I had initiated, my continued role as head of internal audit would constitute an irreconcilable conflict of interest. It was a single paragraph, cold and professional. The second document was an open letter addressed to the employees of Greyline Dynamics. I attached it to my resignation email, which I sent not to HR, but to the company-wide distribution list. In it, I laid out the facts. Stripped of all emotion, I detailed the 312% variance, the existence of the shell companies, and the misappropriation of assets. I did not mention my father, Lorna, or Callie by name. I simply stated that a multi-year scheme had defrauded the company and that the evidence had been turned over to the board and to the Attorney General. I ended the letter with a single sentence: transparency is everything. Then I began the process of cutting the cords. I went into my phone's settings and blocked Lorna's number, then Callie's. I didn't listen to the dozens of voicemails they had left, a mixture of threats, crocodile tears, and panicked pleading. I just erased them. That afternoon, I drove to the house I grew up in. No one was home. The place already felt like a museum of a life I no longer lived. I walked to the front door, placed my house key under the mat where I knew Lorna would find it, and walked away without looking back. My remaining belongings, books, old photos, clothes I hadn't worn in years, I considered them acceptable losses, the cost of escape. My father had moved out the day after the meeting. He found a small, Spartan one-bedroom apartment near the train station, a place that smelled of fresh paint and disinfectant. It was a life stripped down to its essentials. When I visited him there for the first time, he was unpacking a single box of kitchen supplies. The micro-cassette recorder sat on the counter. I picked it up. Its plastic casing was smudged with what looked like machine oil from his workshop. I took it home with me. That evening, I sat and carefully cleaned it with rubbing alcohol and a soft cloth until it looked almost new. I placed it in a drawer, a clean relic of a dirty war. My open letter spread through Greyline's internal network like wildfire. Within hours, my old work email inbox, which I could still access via a secure portal, was flooded. They were from people I barely knew, a warehouse foreman, thanking me for exposing why their equipment budgets had been frozen for 2 years, a junior accountant who said she had been ordered to approve invoices she knew were fake and had been living in fear, a sales coordinator who had been laid off last quarter, dozens of them. They weren't just messages of support, they were testimonials, small acts of courage from the people on the front lines who knew something was wrong but had been too powerless to say anything. The external fallout was swift and brutal. The group of small contractors I had mentioned in the meeting, emboldened by the news, announced they were forming a class action lawsuit against Greyline for predatory contract practices. The local paper, smelling blood, ran a front page. Above the fold headline, Greyline Dynamics under the microscope. Whistleblower complaint alleges massive executive fraud. Serena, out on bail and fighting to save her reputation, did exactly what I expected her to do. She hired a high-powered, notoriously vicious public relations firm. Almost immediately, a counter-narrative began to appear online. Anonymous blog posts and suspiciously coordinated social media accounts started painting me as a vengeful, unstable employee, a scorned mentee who had fabricated a conspiracy to destroy her former mentor. A hashtag began to trend, Mara Quinn Lies. It lasted for about 6 hours. Then, someone, I never found out who, but I suspect it was one of the junior accountants, leaked the audio file of Serena coaching Callie on how to delete the logs. The one where she calls her sweetie. The one where she admits to paying for Callie's apartment. The clip went viral. The PR firm's narrative collapsed in on itself, crushed under the weight of Serena's own words. The hashtag died, and a new one took its place, created by a public that had now heard the truth from the source. Serena Vale is a Lear. A few weeks later, the first wire transfer from the whistleblower reward program hit my account. The number was dizzying, an obscene amount of money for telling the truth. I stared at the balance on my screen, feeling nothing but a strange, hollow detachment. It felt like blood money, so I decided to launder it. I contacted a pro bono legal advocacy group and, with a significant portion of the reward, established a new fund, the Gray Line Employee Legal Defense Fund, dedicated to providing free legal counsel to any current or former employee who was coerced into participating in or covering up corporate malfeasance. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about rebalancing the scales. Life settled into a new, quiet rhythm. The news cycle moved on. The lawyers did what lawyers do. My father and I fell into a routine of weekly dinners at a quiet diner between our two apartments. We didn't talk much about what had happened. We didn't need to. We talked about the weather, about books, about the strange, new, empty space in our lives. We were two survivors learning to navigate the shoreline after the hurricane. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my father. It wasn't about dinner plans. The message was short, but it made the hair on my arms stand up. "Are you free? There's one more thing I never showed you." The kitchen in my father's new apartment was small enough that two people could not pass each other without turning sideways. The countertops were a pale yellow, worn formica from a previous decade. The air was warm, thick with the smell of brewing tea and something else, something I hadn't smelled in years, the faint, clean scent of the oil he used on his woodworking tools, a ghost from his old life in the garage. The golden afternoon light streamed through the single window, illuminating a universe of dust motes dancing in the still air. It was a world away from the cold, sterile glass of the conference room. He didn't say much when I arrived. He just took my coat, his movements a little stiff, and gestured towards one of the two simple wooden chairs at his small dining table. As I sat, the tea kettle on the stove began to whistle, a thin, piercing sound that cut through the quiet. He turned and poured the boiling water into two mismatched mugs. His back to me. The simple domesticity of the act felt both strange and deeply familiar. He placed a mug in front of me. It was an old, heavy ceramic one, with a faded logo of a hardware store that had closed down when I was a child. Then, he sat down opposite me and slid a thick beige envelope across the table. It wasn't a standard business envelope. It was old, the paper soft and fibrous with age. And it was surprisingly heavy. It made a soft, dense sound as it came to rest in front of me. "What is this?" I asked, my voice quiet. "Something I should have given you a long time ago," he said, his eyes on the envelope, not on me. "Something I couldn't—" My fingers trembled slightly as I picked it up. The flap wasn't sealed. I pulled it open and tilted the contents out onto the table. It wasn't a single document, but a thick sheaf of papers, held together by a rusty paperclip. The top page was a stock purchasing agreement, dated 19 years ago. The letterhead was from Gray Line Dynamics, but the logo was an older, clunkier version. The document was filled with the dense, formal language of a legal contract, but two things leaped out at me immediately. The first was the signature of the purchaser, Eleanor Quinn, my mother. The second was the name listed as the beneficiary, the owner of the shares, Mara Quinn. I looked up at my father, my throat suddenly tight. I couldn't form a word. I just stared at him, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. "Your mother was always the planner," he said softly, a faint, sad smile touching his lips. "She never trusted Gray Line, not really. She saw the way the old CEO ran things. She said a company that big always eats its own eventually." He explained that back then, Gray Line offered a preferred stock option for senior employees, a benefit they'd phased out years ago. It allowed them to buy non-voting shares at a steep discount. My mother, a quiet and cautious accountant by nature, had put aside a small amount from every paycheck, slowly, patiently accumulating a block of these shares. But she never put them in her own name. From the very first purchase, she had put them in mine. It was a nest egg, a secret rainy day fund for her daughter, locked away for a future she would never see. After she died, my father continued, his voice growing quieter. The documents were just there, in the safe. I didn't think much of them. Then I married Lorna. He paused, taking a slow sip of his tea. The silence stretched. Lorna, she's a person who takes inventory. Once a week, she'd go into the safe. She'd say she was organizing things. But I knew what she was doing. She was counting, checking, making sure everything was accounted for. If I had tried to transfer the shares, to move them, she would have seen. She would have asked questions. And knowing her, knowing how she felt about you, she would have found a way to claim them, to absorb them into what she called the family assets. I pictured it instantly. Lorna's proprietary gaze, her thin smile, her way of making everything that was mine feel like it was only temporarily on loan. So I left them, my father said. I left them dormant. It was the only way to protect them for you. I waited. I didn't know what I was waiting for, exactly. Just the right moment. A time when she wouldn't be looking. He looked up at me, and his eyes were filled with a terrible, weary clarity. I waited for the day the house caught fire, so I could throw you the ladder. A wave of understanding, so profound it was almost dizzying, washed over me. All those years of his passivity, his quiet acquiescence to Lorna and Callie's casual cruelties, his constant refrain of, "Don't stir the pot." It wasn't weakness. It was a long, silent, agonizing waiting game. He had been protecting the last gift my mother had ever given me. "The shares themselves aren't worth a fortune," he said, pushing the documents closer to me. "But that's not what makes them important. Read the 4th clause of the purchasing agreement. Your mother circled it." I shuffled through the papers until I found the right page. There, in faded red pen, was a circle around a dense block of text. I read it, then read it again. It was a shareholders' rights clause, a relic of an older, more transparent era of corporate governance. It stipulated that any holder of this specific class of preferred stock, in the event of a material restructuring of the board or a finding of executive malfeasance, had the right to nominate one independent candidate for a new seat on the board of directors. It was a key, a permanent key to the boardroom. "After everything that's happened," my father said, "the board is restructuring. They have to. They're creating 2 new oversight seats to show the shareholders they're serious about reform." He leaned forward, his voice earnest. "This gives you a choice. Mara, you can take the money from the whistleblower fund and walk away from this whole mess forever. You've earned that. Or," he paused, letting the weight of his words settle, "you can use this. You can install a permanent alarm bell on their system. You can put someone in that room who answers to no one but the truth." I looked down at my mother's signature, a neat, elegant script at the bottom of the page, and then I thought of my father's whispered words in the cold, misty parking lot. "Don't come back." It had felt like a blade, a final, brutal rejection, but it wasn't. Now I saw it for what it truly was. It was the most desperate, selfless act of love I had ever known. He wasn't pushing me out. He was standing in the doorway of a burning building and shoving me out into the clean, safe air. Knowing the roof was about to collapse on him, he was trying to sever the tie so that when he went down, he wouldn't pull me down with him. Tears welled in my eyes, hot and sudden. I didn't wipe them away. I pushed the papers back across the table. "I don't want to be on the board," I said, my voice thick. He nodded slowly. "I know. But I know who should be." I took a deep breath, the decision crystallizing in my mind, clean and absolute. It wasn't a choice between revenge and peace. It was a choice about what came next, about building something better on the ashes. "I'll sign a proxy. We can authorize a lawyer to make the nomination on my behalf. I want a cybersecurity expert, someone who can build an audit system so transparent that a scheme like this can never, ever happen again." My father's shoulders, which had been hunched with the weight of his long-held secret, seemed to relax. A slow smile spread across his face, and for the first time in years, it reached his eyes. Later, we ate. He'd made a large pot of minestrone soup over the weekend, and he ladled 2 bowls for us from the fridge. We didn't bother to heat it up. We just sat there in the fading golden light, eating cold soup with spoons that didn't match. And then, a small, awkward laugh escaped my lips. My father looked at me, a questioning look in his eyes. "What is it?" he asked. "I don't know," I said, another small laugh bubbling up. "It's just this." He smiled, and then he laughed too, a real laugh, rusty from disuse. It was clumsy. It was out of tune. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. We sat there, in that tiny kitchen, laughing for no reason at all, and for the first time in more than a decade, in that small, sunlit room, no one was telling a lie. The next morning, a pale, watery sun did little to warm the city. The news broke just before 9. A local TV station had a van parked across the street from the Gray Line Tower, and I watched the report on my phone from the anonymity of a coffee shop a block away. The lead story was a press release from the Gray Line Dynamics Board of Directors. It was a masterpiece of corporate damage control, all solemn tones and forward-looking promises. It announced the immediate appointment of Dr. Eris Thorne, a nationally recognized cybersecurity and ethics expert, to a newly created independent oversight seat on the board. My nomination, filtered through the proxy of a law firm, had been accepted without question. They were too terrified to refuse. The second part of the report was more satisfying, a grainy, long-lens shot of Serena Vale, her face a mask of rage, being led from her high-rise apartment building by 2 plainclothes detectives. The reporter's voiceover was grim. Serena hadn't been arrested for the fraud itself. That would be a long, complex federal case. She had been arrested on state charges of obstruction of justice and witness tampering. In her panic, she had spent the previous evening trying to threaten one of the junior accountants into recanting their testimony. It was a stupid, desperate move, and it had sealed her fate far more quickly than any financial crime. She had been so busy playing chess that she'd walked right off a cliff. I finished my coffee and walked out into the cold morning air. I didn't go home. I walked towards the tower, drawn by a morbid need to see the aftermath. I stopped across the street, high above the entrance. 2 men in harnesses were suspended on a platform, slowly, methodically, removing the company's slogan from the granite facade. The giant, stainless steel letters of "Transparency is everything" were coming down, one by one. I watched as they unbolted the final G in everything. The letter swung free for a moment, twisting in the wind, a meaningless silver shape against the sky before they hauled it onto the platform. The building looked naked without its lie, the dark, pockmarked granite like a scar where the words had been. The promise was officially gone. All that was left was the truth. My phone vibrated in my pocket, a low, insistent buzz. I pulled it out without thinking. The name on the screen made my stomach clench. Thorne Maddox. His name, his actual name, not a blocked number. The arrogance was breathtaking. After everything, he still thought he could talk his way out of it, that a private chat could somehow fix the unfixable. He still saw me as a problem to be managed, not a force that had already swept him away. My thumb hovered over the screen. I felt a phantom urge to answer, to hear the desperation in his voice, to listen to him bargain and plead. That would have been revenge. That would have been feeding the wound. Instead, I tapped the screen 3 times. More options. Block number. Confirm. The call ended. His name vanished from my screen, exiled to a digital wasteland from which he could never return. I said the word aloud, a quiet exhalation into the cold air. Cut. I turned and walked away from the building, my back to the empty space where the slogan used to be. I took out my phone again and sent a new message. This one to my father. It was only 2 words. It's done. A minute later, his reply came. It wasn't words. It was a photo. The image was of the top drawer of the cheap wooden dresser in his new apartment. Inside, nestled amongst neatly folded socks and handkerchiefs, was the small, black micro-cassette recorder. Its job was over. It was a weapon that had been cleaned, holstered, and retired. A quiet, humble artifact that had brought down an empire. I kept walking until I reached a public mailbox on a busy street corner. I stopped and reached into my coat pocket. My fingers closed around the hard plastic of my old employee ID badge. I pulled it out and looked at it one last time. The photo was of a younger woman. Her smile professional, but her eyes tired. Mara Quinn, head of internal audit, an identity that no longer existed, a key to a kingdom I had helped burn to the ground. It was the last physical tie, the last piece of the life that had almost consumed me. I didn't hesitate. I pushed it through the mail slot. It made a thin, clattering sound as it hit the bottom of the empty metal box. A final, insignificant punctuation mark. I turned my back on the mailbox and didn't look back. I would not be getting it back. Later that day, I sat in my quiet, temporary apartment. The afternoon sun cast a long rectangle of light on the floor. I opened the small, black notebook I carried with me, the same kind I had used for years to jot down audit notes and discrepancies. I turned to a fresh page. My hand was steady as I wrote a final entry, a final closing of the books. It wasn't a summary of events. It was a conclusion. The one true thing I had learned through all of this. Revenge isn't about blood. It's about ceasing to feed the wound. The final scene unfolded without an audience. I was walking down a busy downtown street, just another face in the afternoon crowd. I was heading nowhere in particular, simply moving forward. As I passed the entrance of a modern office building, its large automatic glass doors began to slide shut behind a departing businessman. For a brief, fleeting second, as the two panes of glass slid together, I saw my own reflection, a figure, walking away, distorted and then bisected as the doors met with a soft, final sigh. The reflection vanished. I kept walking, leaving nothing behind. End. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to connect with all of you. So please comment below and let me know where in the world you're listening from and share your thoughts. If you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing to the channel and giving this video a like, and to help this story reach more listeners. Please support us by hitting the hype button. It truly makes a difference.